friends from North Park University. Any friends and supporters of Mr. Bakr? Is there anybody that I missed? Thank you. Let me address briefly his accomplishments since the resentencing. So, since the resentencing, Mr. Bakr has continued to excel and rack up additional accomplishments. In February of 2023, he participated and completed the Crucible Project Retreat. It's a men's retreat centered around trauma and healing. It's almost exclusively done for men on the outside who are seeking trauma-informed ministry training. In spring of 2023, he completed North Park University's Writing Advisor Tutor Training. In conjunction, he has been offered a job tutoring by North Park's Writing Center Director, Melissa Pavlik, who is here today. In June of 2023, he was offered and accepted a position as a course teaching assistant for the fourth time with Reverend Sandra Van Opstal, and a position as a North Park University Writing Center workshop facilitator. In the summer of 2023, he wrote an article, Prison, the New Frontier of Collaborative Learning, which was published in Purdue University's Writing Center Journal. In August of 2023, he completed the Healing Beyond Harm program. This is the apology bank that was referenced by board member Bakr. In January of 2024, he was selected to be a community navigator and an ambassador with the Illinois Prison Project. In May of 2024, he completed Restore Justice and Precious Blood Ministry of Reconciliation's Peace Circle training. And in August of 2024, he completed a year of weekly workshops for the RIT 112 Spiritual Writing class, which culminated in the anthology Writing from Both Sides of the Moon. So he's continued to have many accomplishments since his resentencing. What separates Mr. Bakr's petition is not only the overwhelming number of support that he has received from family members, from friends, from deans, from teachers, and from students from North Park University. In my almost 30 years of coming before this board on behalf of clients, I have never seen a sitting state's attorney testify before the board on behalf of an inmate. I have never seen a former warden testify before the board on behalf of a petitioner. And I have never seen a former judge, the judge who resentenced him, testify in support of a petitioner's release. Not only was this the first time that they had done this, but the reason that they did it is because all of them had met Mr. Bakr, had engaged with Mr. Bakr, had come to know Mr. Bakr, and felt that based on these interactions that they felt compelled to come before this board and speak on his behalf. There is something about meeting him, and you will meet him in a few minutes. He's very nervous, but I think you'll soon see what's so special about him. Something about meeting him that really changes the equation for Mr. Bakr. I would also add that I've never seen a case where so many correctional officers stepped up to the plate on behalf of a petitioner. More than 24. I think the number is close to 15. Including a sergeant, a lieutenant, as well as other line correctional officers. And as we were walking in to this room today, my colleague was getting texts from still other people who wished Mr. Bakr luck, other correctional officers who didn't feel like they could write a letter on his behalf. So everybody who meets him, who gets to know him, who sees him on a daily basis, has been profoundly affected by Mr. Bakr. And it's important to know that these correctional officers saw him on a daily basis, and they are from institutions throughout the Department of Corrections. And he continues to be impress officers and the warden at his current institution, Illinois River. I was just there yesterday and I can't remember the name of it. I just want to highlight one more thing, actually a couple more things. The first is, I think it's important for you to hear exactly what Warden Osborne said about Jamal Bakr. And he said, "I have watched individuals in custody react after parole hearings. I have seen the effect of these grants and denials on the institution. I believe that if Jamal was granted parole, the news would be celebrated by individuals in custody and prison staff alike." When we go to visit Mr. Bakr, when we did it in Stateville and when we did it yesterday at Illinois River, we are constantly interrupted by correctional officers and other inmates, other incarcerated persons, who come to us and tell us about how important Mr. Bakr has been in their lives. He said not only would the news be celebrated, but it would have a positive effect on institutional discipline, and if denied, it would have a negative effect on the facility. It would create a continued sense of hopelessness among many in the institutions, and certainly all who know him and have been touched by him. It would send the message that if the best of us, the best among us, isn't able to earn youthful parole, what chance do we have? When I reached out to Judge Hooks, the sentencing judge, I should say when I reached out to all three, Kim Fox, the sentencing judge, Judge Hooks, and the warden, Kenneth Osborne, they got back to me in record time. They responded to me, with respect to State's Attorney Fox. I sent her an email on a Saturday afternoon, and I got an email back in 5 minutes. But Judge Hooks said, "In my 16 years as a criminal court judge, I have rarely seen a more deserving person for an early release. The Prisoner Review Board should not view my decision to resentence him to approximately 32 and a half years as my final word on the subject. That was an agreed upon sentence between the State's Attorney's Office and Mr. Bakr's attorney, and had he been given the opportunity, based upon all of the supporters who spoke at his sentencing hearing, many of whom are here today, he said, I would have sentenced him to even less time." Mr. Bakr was originally sentenced to 60 years. His sentence was then cut to 32 and a half years. At 32 and a half years, his sentence is substantially longer than that of his co-defendants in this case, some of whom were older than Mr. Bakr, and some of whom were, shall we say, the masterminds of this horrible crime that he was involved in. The other two men who were sentenced to 10 and 12 years, respectively, but they were sentenced at 50%, and so their sentences were 5.5 or 6 years at most. I think that's all that I would like to add. Just, if you don't mind, can I confer briefly with my colleague here? The last thing I want to say is that Mr. Bakr has had some pretty serious health problems in recent months. He passed out in his cell. He was rushed to the infirmary. They discovered that he has heart issues, an arrhythmia, and other issues. And he also has had, it's been discovered that he has lesions on both his liver and his gallbladder. There have not been follow-up appointments yet, MRIs, of those areas of concern, but it is a source of great anxiety to him, to his family members and his supporters, that if he is required to serve another 9 years in prison, that his health will continue to deteriorate. Thank you.
Good morning, my name is Pastor Phil Jackson, and I serve as a founder and CEO of the Firehouse Community Arts Center in North Lawndale on the west side of Chicago. And I am here today because I love Jamal. I'm here because I have served youth and young adults and who are been labeled as the most violent young men and women for the last 37 years. And that's been my work on the streets, in the church, and now in our own nonprofit with the Firehouse Community Arts Center. I know, and we know in our team with 30 staff, who has done outreach and mentoring, who's really playing the game of transformation and who's just really who's really committed to it. And our journey with young men is about 100 young men and women we serve every year. We see the challenges of trauma. We see the challenges of perpetual lifestyle and activity, but we also see and are hopeful with those who we serve and walk alongside, their recognition of another life is possible. And in my 37 years of serving young men and women in these spaces, Jamal is one of the most ideal person to have, one, recognized the harm that he's caused and owned that, but in so doing found a way in a culture in DOJ where there's not access to your own personal healing process, not access to rehabilitation as easy as we would like it, has pursued ways for his own healing, to then find in that midst of that his own purpose to be a healer himself and to be an advocate in the prison, to where those in the prison system rely on him to mediate conflict, so that that person who's going through whatever they're going through can be healthy in the midst of the sentencing or the midst of their own life inside. To have the weight of these many years and knowing that this is your call and your passion, it is to me an ideal situation for him to be hired at the Firehouse Community Arts Center. We have what we call credible messengers, men and women who have done time but have recognized, hey, I am on a healing journey, and now I'm committed to be this wounded healer, if you will, and have brought restoration to our community in North Lawndale, where there's been a 30% decrease in murders in the areas we serve and an 85% decrease in non-fatal shootings. We believe hiring Jamal, because of his own commitment in this journey, without a nudge, without access, without something already created there in the prison system. He's pursued that he would bring that same gold, that same gift to us on the streets in North Lawndale, if we can keep him there before he gets hired somewhere else. But in the context of his own passion, it complements our work. Jamal was a great student of mine, as I had the opportunity to be a professor, adjunct professor, if you will, at North Park Seminary. And his commitment to his own academic excellence and his commitment to take this from the head to the heart to the hands was pushing me as a professor to say, yo, I got to go back and figure out another way to challenge this young man in order to feed his purpose and passion. Well, so Pastor Phil, if we take that theory, how does that work when this happens in that scenario? And in that kind of thinking as a professor, you want that from a student, not only from a person who wants to get a good grade, but you want it because it's in their body, it's in their DNA, it's in their purpose. And so in the midst of serving for this long and meeting young men like Jamal, it is a breath of fresh air. It's a breath of fresh air, because nothing was handed to him to be moving in that transformative work. And so we are ready to hire him today. Our team knows we are ready to hire him today because of the impact that he's already made inside. We know that impact will be tripled on the outside, especially with the current momentum of our team right now. And not only because of a great opportunity to bring his work, but because of the person that he is going to be that impactful to the young men who he can then speak life into before they get and turn the corner to get locked up, where they think the street is their only out. That this man, the tears come from the fact of the people that I had to see go get locked up because of the limited people that they have in their life to turn the corner, and the people that are in their life and the impact that they make. And we don't have enough in our space to bring them. And when you run across somebody who you know is going to be that impactful, it is it's perpetual hope in that space. And I just come before you now as a pastor, as a friend, as a professor, as a person who's committed to this walk with Jamal for this transformation, to honor what he has done. If we're going to be of any kind of consequence of a state that says a person who is committed to this level of reconciliation and restoration, and we're not going to honor that, then what kind of state do we have? I've honored to be asked by the state's attorney to be on her transition team for juvenile offenders, that there is something in her plan to advocate and mediate where young people get caught up in the system, that they can turn the corner. She already sees the need for that, even at a younger age. So I just say that this is a person that, even though he did all the work, you may get the kudos for stamping the fact that this is one that we recognize, that we want every person in the system to take advantage of that kind of restoration, or we're not going to be that kind of state and take this work that he's done in vain. You know, this is a great guy. We need him tomorrow. I needed him yesterday in Chicago. And being able to have a support team like he has, and the work that we do, we find sometimes that's the missing link. We're with young men 20 to 25 hours a week, and if and they're back to 8 hours, 9 hours on the street if we don't have tension on the street to keep them accountable. Jamal's got a support system. This is just a snippet of this support system, and that element right there continues. What we've noticed, and maybe even you know yourself, that continual support keeps a person on the path that they've committed their lives to. So, man, bring my employee home. let me get my money to work. Thank you.
Just so it's clear, Pastor Jackson is referring to the new state's attorney of Cook County, Eileen O'Neill Burke, who has named him to her transition team. I think it's time for Mr. Bakr. Unless anyone has any questions for us. You're up, Jamar.
Just want to say good morning to everybody. I'm extremely nervous, but I am present. I am fully present, and I'm here to say that I want to be clear that I'm not innocent. The truth of who I've become must begin with the truth of what I've done. I'm guilty of taking Daniel Ortiz's life, wounding Marcelo Rivera, and causing immeasurable pain to their family, to their loved ones. My 18th birthday was just 36 hours before I committed these crimes. When the judge originally sentenced me, he didn't consider my youth, and he gave me a sentence that I could not outlive because I would have been 78 years old when I was released. I learned throughout my prison experience that the only way that people with sentences like mine got any relief was by making claims of innocence. The only time they even heard of lawyers responding, let alone taking cases, was when claims like these were made. Please believe that when I made innocent claims, it was not done or taken lightly. I did not do it thoughtlessly. I did it knowing that I was guilty. It was motivated by more than just the desire to have a sentence that reflected my transformation. It was also motivated by fear and despair. When the window opened for juveniles to get resentenced, they started going home, I was happy for them. Yet at the exact same time, I was also in despair, because all that separated me from them was 36 hours. 36 hours is what separated me from getting resentenced as a juvenile and for feeling like innocence claims were my only hope. You have to understand that I was in the same programs with them, working the same jobs, living in the same cell houses as some of the people that got resentenced. I even mentored some and helped others fill out applications for school. The hardest part was watching them get the relief that I wanted, especially when some went home who weren't doing the same rehabilitative work the rest of us were. As the years passed, the resentencing was not extended to anyone over the age of 17. My only chances got bleaker. There were a few developments in the appeals courts in Illinois, and the youth offender parole bill was still pending, and I kept hope alive, and I hung on to that for as long as I could. However, the hope I felt was soon crushed when the Supreme Court of Illinois closed the door on sentencing claims like mine, and the youth offender parole law was passed without retroactivity. It was then that I decided to file my post-conviction, and in January of 2020 it was accepted. The goal had always been to get a reduced sentence, so I asked my lawyer to start negotiations and that I wanted to drop those innocence claims immediately. But then the pandemic hit, and my petition, like the whole world, was put on hold. The fears I felt were fueled by the fears that fueled my despair were born out of my experience of being a minority in Stateville. I had met too many 60 and 70-year-old men who spent 40 and 50 years in prison, who were 19 and 18 when they committed their crimes. Some of them could have been productive members of society, but they died before they ever got the chance. I was also in Stateville when the pandemic hit. And in the first 8 months, 14 men died. The death I have known historically, and the death I was seeing around me, intensified the fear I held inside of me. So I filed those claims, and I did it because I didn't know what else to do. It became painfully obvious that the only real chance that I had was in the state's attorney's willingness to negotiate a new sentence. And by the grace of God, she had mercy on me. I had a lot of anxiety related to the innocence claims I made. So when the state offered me 34 years, I immediately waived those claims and took the deal. I did not hesitate, and I felt a sense of relief about dropping those claims. When I took the deal, everyone was aware that it automatically made me eligible for a youth offender parole review. And I believed then, like I do right now, in this law and in this board's experience. Because all I wanted at that point was a chance to tell the board my story. I hold the belief that actions speak louder than words. And so I ask that you look at the way that I have lived, my years of self-improvement, and the actions I've taken bettering those around me, to outweigh the desperate legal strategy I took when I felt helpless and afraid. The truth about my story is that I have done the most regretful thing a person can do. What is equally true is that I have used my transformation and education as a platform to be of service in a redemptive way. I have taken full advantage of every opportunity made available to me. As you heard Dr. Bakr explain, I was part of the first cohort to receive undergrad credit from DePaul University's Restorative Justice Program. I was the first graduate student to be accepted into a master's degree program. I graduated at the top of my class and I received an award in academic excellence. I've spent the last 2.5 years as a teaching fellow for the degree program that I graduated from. I have taught inside and outside students courses in liberation theology, social justice advocacy, embodied storytelling, and expository preaching. I've maintained a GPA of 4.0 and I've accumulated close to 90 credit hours. I've been recommended for PhD studies. As you heard Dr. Bakr mention, I was the first person allowed in Stateville in 20 years to marry my beautiful wife. I was part of the first cohort in the Apology Letter Bank program. And I was selected by the then warden, Dr. Osborne, to be a member of the first city council, made up of other wardens, counselors, staff, and individuals in custody, where we created programs that promoted cultural changes and increased the safety in the institution. I became the only peer support specialist approved to mentor offenders in segregation who were demonstrating significant behavioral issues. Most recently, I've been appointed to North Park's teaching team in Illinois River as a primary teaching fellow, where I just finished co-teaching a course in theology. Having only been in the facility for 3 months, I've already been selected as a mentor to young offenders who are in the orientation phase of their in-custody stay, and hopes to help them develop pro-social values and adjust in positive ways. I began this address by saying that the truth of who I've become must start with the truth of what I've done. Above any of these accomplishments, the only appropriate way of carrying the truth is by living my life in service and honoring Daniel's life, by doing the work of violence prevention and preemptive deterrence with Pastor Phil Jackson, and of teaching with North Park. Who I've become has allowed me to accept the truth of the harm I've caused and to find a pathway to accountability. I can look back on this path and at certain points, and I can see how I've become capable of carrying that truth in a transformative way. Like when I found God, there was nowhere to hide from my guilt and shame. When I left the gang, I was afraid, but I had to form a new identity outside of dangerous paradigms. When I turned to my family, I found the kind of love that encourages you towards your greatest potential. When I learned about restorative justice principles, I found a place of accountability and of healing. When I got married, I found a partner who would hold me responsible for what I said and did. And oh, how has she? When I began to mentor, I found the purpose behind the harm, by helping others break the cycles of violence that plague so many young lives. I spent the last decade dedicated to showing that I'm not the impulsive and yes, dangerous and vengeful teenager I was the night I committed these crimes. I hope that my transformation serves as evidence that the ceiling for my greatest potential should not be set by my worst decisions. I heard once that containing someone to the worst part of their history is like breaking into the home of their past. You can look for me in the home of my past, but I am not there. I am somewhere else because I have become somebody else. The man that I am today is and can be an asset to his community. And I pray that you will give me the chance to prove that. Thank you to everybody there. Thank you to the board. Thank you.
I guess I'll direct the question to Mr. Drizzen, at least initially, but I just want the answer, so I don't care who answers it, really. You did make some comments about the sentences that the co-defendants received and the time that they served. And obviously they're not in an identical situation to Mr. Bakr. So I'm trying to understand why you made that point. Did any of the co-defendants fire shots on that day? Were any of them shooters other than Mr. Bakr?
None of them were shooters.
And they pled guilty and cooperated with the state and testified against Mr. Bakr?
They did.
Okay, thank you.
Let me first start by acknowledging and commending you, Mr. Bakr, on just how much reform and rehabilitation that you have taken advantage of since 2014 is pretty noticeable change. So I want to acknowledge that and commend you for that. My question stems more so from the plea deal itself, one that you acknowledged to accepting, negotiated, certainly in light of everything positive that's been on the table today, was on the table then, and part of why that plea deal occurred. It was mentioned to us today that part of why you took that plea deal was to undo the harm, if you will, of continuing a claim of innocence, wanting to accept accountability, a certain level of punishment, and to not further harm the victims or drag them into further proceedings. I'd like for you to maybe reconcile that intent and what's been shared with us with the fact that despite that negotiated plea deal in the last couple of years, a little less than 2 years, it's not just that we've filed for this and come before the board for this parole hearing, but also you almost immediately filed a clemency petition as well, both of which bring those same victims back into the light, back into proceedings to deal with this, and maybe in light of that as well, the fact that part of that negotiated plea deal was the murder sentence alone has not been exhausted. I think we're at about 23 years, and that was reduced to around 24 and a half, and that has not been served out yet either, and yet there have been two petitions that have been filed since that negotiated plea deal. I wonder if you can speak to how we reconcile those two things on the table.
Thank you for the question. And I'll try to answer it in the best way that I can. And I understand, as a practitioner of restorative justice, that in order for restoration to have happened or to occur, there has to be a balance. And I want the board to understand that on one hand, I've recognized the burden of truth that I carry, that I've caused immeasurable pain to the family of Daniel Ortiz and to El Marcelo. That's a truth that I carry with me. And on the other hand, I had another truth. That at first I had a sentence that I could not outlive. And second, I got resentenced. I had a sentence that gave me an opportunity to tell my story of transformation to the board and show that I'm committed to doing the work of not righting my wrongs, because there is no righting my wrongs. No matter how many times I say I'm sorry, no matter how much time I do in prison, no matter how many people I help, I know that I can't right those wrongs. But I am dedicating my life in service, and I feel that there's an opportunity for me to be of service to the broader community and to honor the harms that I've caused by impacting greater change. And I just wanted the board to hear my story. And I appreciate the opportunity.
Understood. Thank you. And again, I will commend you on the efforts you've made, regardless of the outcome and regardless of when your release is. I think your dedication to the path you're on will serve you well.
Thank you.
May I respond briefly to that? Thank you. I was not his attorney when he filed his post-conviction petition. I was not his attorney when he filed his clemency petition. We got involved in this case once he became eligible for a youth parole hearing. Everybody in the courtroom, and I've certainly spoken to his defense attorney, I've read the transcript, I've spoken to the judge about this, understood that the sentence that he was given on resentencing was not a ceiling. It was a ceiling, I'm sorry. And that he would be coming before this board to ask for a further sentence reduction. What I find remarkable about that is that the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, after she met Jamal on several occasions, changed their position with regard to clemency from an opposition to clemency to a no objection to clemency, and finally to a support for clemency, based upon the fact that he took accountability for his actions and because of the remarkable person that he is. And that the judge who resentenced him, who also knew that he would be eligible to come before this board, said that had he been given the chance, he would have resentenced him to even less time. This is the body that really should be the body that hears Jamal's story. And the reason for that is because you have been to Menard. You have been to Stateville. You have been to Illinois River. You know how difficult it can be to not only survive in there, but to thrive in there. Judges don't know that. State's attorneys don't know that. We defense attorneys don't know that. And so his goal from the beginning was to get to tell his story before the body that is charged with the duty of determining whether or not he should be paroled. The best body to make that determination.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, Mr. Bakr, I also want to join in and commend you on your evolution through the struggle and your path. Your eloquency is second to none from what I've listened to over the years. Your support group, and I want to commend the pastor, for the energy and you know, you've been there. I know who you are. And I know of your work. And day to day, we say that you don't have to be always, even if you're behind four walls, sometimes even out here, but your heart lives in liberty. And even out here, you can feel a little incarcerated because the work you do on a day-to-day basis, and you see all these examples, Pastor, you live it. It's not a snapshot for you. And I appreciate your evolution from the church to the educational, academic, and to the, we have too many churches in that community. I say sometimes as I was working Humboldt Park, trying to help get real services for folks as we prayed, as we were burying them. I'm a social worker, so I commend you for that. Mr. Bakr, my question, I know that community very well. You would just become 18 at that time, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And you're with some other folks, other people, and those individuals were older than you, weren't they?
Yes, they were. There was two 17-year-olds, a 19-year-old, and a 20-year-old, and I was 18.
And in that van, can I ask you? I've read this document up and down now, but however, I want you to help me understand. So you were a passenger in that van, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I also want, and thank you for that, and also because I'm familiar with the work and understanding the support group and the things you've done, understanding when that plea deal all occurred, it's very, to me, the asterisk here is from what counsel's pointed out eloquently enough for me to understand. My understanding of this is that even after the plea deal was had, subsequent to that, those players, those actors, their same system, the judge, the state attorney, those individuals have come back and said, even with the plea deal, that they would have done something even more to try to assist you in that path to release. Is this what I'm understanding, counsel?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you for that. Because I've had a very difficult moment with this, to be very frank with you, and I consider myself a person who understands restorative justice up and down, and I think I have a few things out there. However, when it comes to the judge and what Judge Hooks pointed out, and I have a great respect there, I want to commend you for those parts, and for all those technical parts. I really want to not get too caught up in that, because this has to deal with where you would go from here. So when you go from here, where would you go from here? And in a nutshell, if you would go home tomorrow, where would you be living? Where would you go? Help us understand that part.
So my wife last year purchased a home in Midlothian, Illinois, which is located in the southern part of Cook County.
And thank you. And is the wife here? I keep seeing. I thought so. Okay, thank you.
I can't see the video, but I know for a fact she's there. She's gonna be.
Yes, she is. But you have quite a few people here, and I'm over here focused on my notes too. Okay. With that said and done, I appreciate that information that you've given, and the fact that I think it's the first I've heard where you're also an Illinois Prisoner Project ambassador.
Yes, sir.
Did I hear that mentioned?
Yeah,
thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't really have any other questions. Mr. Bakr, I know it's been a long road for you. I think that this is what the Department of Corrections is about. However, I think you bring that uniqueness to these dynamics yourself. So I really commend you and thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you.
May I just add, Mr. Delgado, just to clear the record, and I'm sure that Jamal would want to correct this as well. He was a passenger in that car to begin with, but he was the person who fired the shots that killed the victim.
Thank you. I wasn't going to go that deep because I'm very straightforward and hip to that. And the fact that, because I come from these communities, and I understand I'm a little older now, and it's a fine line. But at the end of the day, yes, and I had questions about that, but I'd rather just continue my interview as to understanding, Mr. Bakr, some of the dynamics that happened that day. And between the viewing of, I had never really heard of the other group of the racers, and I have a very strong background in sociology of street crews, if you will, because I try not to use the terminologies. However, and I'm very familiar with the Latin states, and from the 70s all the way through. So understanding how that got there, that was a concern of my counselor at the end of the day. But that was then, and facts are a stubborn thing, and I accept that. Old John Adams quote. But I'm looking at the evolution of this individual and how it's relevant to me as it going forward within the structure of our statutes and public safety, and who this individual is and the community that is here to support him. To me, that's a wonderful example of democracy and social justice. So thank you for your time, though.
You're welcome.
Mr. Trippy, I just want to, I don't have necessarily, well, maybe it'll be a clarifying question. I know we talked about the gang affiliation, and you also indicated, Jamal, that you are no longer affiliated with the gang, and you've been working very hard. Okay, I just want to reaffirm that. And, I really appreciate us as individuals taking the journey with the community, and I appreciate the community being present. As you indicated, Pastor, it goes from, I think you said, from head to heart to hand, right? And I think that's what's critically important for transformation. So I want to thank you all for being here today to demonstrate that there's a community willing to continuously take responsibility in lifting, because it's not going to be an easy journey whether you remain an institution or you return. And I thank you for that, and thank you for being here, and I continue to invite you to always be present at these hearings and support it. So thank you, and thank you for the great packet of information. Yes.
You're welcome.
I do have a couple. Mr. Bakr, I'd just like to provide you with the opportunity to speak to two things. First off, in terms of accountability, I will welcome you just to speak in terms of your culpability relative to your co-offenders on that day. Can you give a brief account?
Prior to that night, I had been shot 5 times. Most recently, before that night, it was about 5 weeks before it. And I was trying to avoid re-injuring myself. I was trying to avoid being reharmed. So I was in my house for those 5 weeks. And I received a phone call. And one of the members of the gang that I was in, named Antonio Gomez, called me and asked if I would come out and celebrate my birthday that had just passed. And I really didn't want to. He insisted and said that I could get in the van and drive around with him, that I have to worry about walking around because I have received 3 gunshot wounds, 1 to my foot, the others to my legs. So I ended up relenting, getting in the van, and we drove around for maybe an hour or 2. In the van were 2 younger members who I was kind of familiar with, Jesus Navarro and Oscar Garcia, and there was another guy that I wasn't really too familiar with. His name was George Melendez, I believe. And Antonio Gomez was a driver. We drove around for maybe an hour or 2, drinking, smoking marijuana. I had been high almost every day since I was 14 years old. And the only time that I wasn't high was those 5 weeks that I was in the house, because I was really just trying to recuperate. So I got really drunk and high, and we drove around. The conversation about me being shot came up, and they asked how I was doing. They asked me if I wanted to get my run back, which means was I seeking retaliation. We had passed by on 43rd and Ashland some people that people who were in the band with me recognized to be potential oppositions in other gangs. At first, Antonio said, let's get out and fight with them. And I didn't want to. I couldn't hardly move, let alone fight. And I told Antonio that I thought that what if they had a gun, what were we gonna do if they had a gun? But I didn't want to get shot again. After that, Antonio made a U-turn, made a phone call and called Armando Montalongo. He called Armando and asked Armando if he had a gun. We went to Armando's house. Armando approached the van on the passenger side. I opened the window and he handed a gun to me. I attempted to hand the gun off to Antonio, and he told me that he was driving and that I needed to hold it. While we were driving back towards the location, I didn't want to hurt anybody. So I asked Antonio, who's gonna shoot? Who's gonna do the shooting? And Antonio said, you are gonna do it. You're the one that needs this run back. I wish I would have got out of the car. We continued to drive towards 43rd and Ashland. And when we arrived there, Antonio parked in the alley. I again tried to back out, saying I couldn't really walk at that. Whoa. And Antonio said that Oscar would get out of the car with me to make sure there was nobody around. I had the sickest feeling in my stomach, feeling that I feel now, because I know what I would have done. I got out of the vehicle, walked towards Oscar, and he pointed me to some individuals he felt were an opposing gang. I lifted the gun. I shot 3 times. I walked back to the van. There is not a moment that goes by that I don't wish I could take something back. But I recognize that I can't. The remorse that I feel tells me that I can't. That I must live my life in a way that creates no further harm. And I have to be responsible for the way that I've hurt Daniel, the way that I hurt Marcelo, and the way my actions have continued to hurt them. I don't want to place blame on anybody but myself. I had been through a lot at that point in my life. Violence was all around me. It wasn't normal. Not to everybody else, but to me and my community it was. It was never right. And I apologize for what I've done.
Thank you, Mr. Bakr. One other matter that Mr. Boland had touched on to some extent with the kind of erosion to the initial sentencing. Those who have been most deeply impacted by this crime may have taken some small amount of solace in that initial 60-year sentence. And clearly the resentencing resulted in a substantial downward adjustment, and a determination in favor of your release would further erode whatever slight comfort they might have received from your sentence. You did speak eloquently in our interview regarding the way that you intend to center the harm that you have created to the victim's family. in your life post-release, and I was wondering if you could speak specifically to what it means to center that harm in your post-release life for the board.
So I've been given the opportunity and blessed with interacting with restorative justice practice and principles. And it was through my understanding of the 5 stages of accountability that I realized what centering the harm actually means. And the 5 steps of accountability are guilt, shame, regret, remorse, responsibility. Guilt is what you feel when you know you've done something wrong. Shame is what you feel when other people know you've done something wrong. Regret is what you feel when you wish you can take something back. Remorse is what you feel when you recognize that you can't take something back. Ownership and responsibility, which is the gateway to accountability, means that you take ownership of what you've done, knowing that you can't take it back. You center the harm by living your life in service, by trying to do everything that you can to prevent yourself and from others from creating harm. I know that of the 3 principles of restoration, reconciliation, and restitution in restorative justice, there is no restituting the harm that I caused. There is no giving back the life that you take. But I must center the harm that I caused by doing whatever within my power, live in service, to never forget the harm that I've caused and live my life of accountability out loud.
Thank you, Mr. Bakr. Does anybody else have any other questions? Anything that you would like to add? Yeah.
I can't hear. I still can't hear.
The question I have is, 2 years ago you got sentenced, and you brought an agreed disposition of 34.5 years before you got sentenced. So less than 2 years ago, you thought that 34.5 years was the time. Now, 2 years later, you're estimating to be set down. Why did you agree 2 years ago to 34.5? Why did you support? Tell me why you accepted that agreement. Why?
I'm sorry. I cannot hear.
2 years ago, you accepted a plea agreement for 34.5 years. So that means that you agreed with that sentence 2 years ago. So what has changed since then for you thought it was an acceptable sentence 2 years ago? Why should the board change that decision when you agreed with it 2 years ago?
Dr. Globalcar, I can't really hear the honorable board member. Can you please communicate the question for me so that way I can answer?
Sure. I'm not sure. Are you able to hear me any
Yes,
clearer?
I am.
Interesting.
Clearly,
Okay.
yes.
All right. So Mr. Tupi had posed the question if you had agreed to the sentence just a couple years ago in your resentencing, why should we consider a further reduction so soon today?
I want the board to understand that when I took the plea agreement, it was with the understanding that I would be able to come in front of this board today. I believe in this process. I believe in this board. I believe that the board was the appropriate venue for me to bring my story, tell my story of transformation. And I trust the board to do what they will with how I represented myself today. I believe that then, and I believe that now.
Thank you, Mr. Bakr. And Mr. Drizzen, you had a statement.
I was not present when he was resentenced. I have read the transcript. I have spoken to the parties involved. Everybody there understood that the resentencing was going to be a vehicle to enable him to come before this board. It wasn't a final word for the judge in his sentencing, nor was it an acceptance that that was the amount of time that he deserved. At the time of the resentencing also, he did not yet have an offer to be paroled directly to work with Pastor Phil, an offer that has since surfaced that will pay him $50,000 a year to start, give him full benefits, and allow him to do the further kind of anti-violence work that he is doing on the inside, but to take his formidable skills to the outside and to save other lives by his example and by his counsel. The question before this board today, I respectfully submit, is not whether 31 or 32 and a half years of a sentence is the appropriate sentence. The question is, does he need to serve another 9 years in prison in order for this sentence not to deprecate the seriousness of the offense? And on that point, I think the two best statements you have in the record come from the Cook County State's Attorney Kim Fox, as well as the judge, William Hooks, who sentenced him. Thank you.
Okay, do I hear any other questions? Oh, go ahead, Mr. Bakr.
Yeah, I also want to make a comment to my desire to do the work that I'm already doing outside of this space. And Pastor Phil, I apologize if I plagiarize you. What Pastor Phil puts it is that once a person enters into the system, the harm is already happened. And as much as I am dedicated to doing the work on the inside, I know that once a person enters into this system, either they are harmed or they have caused harm to somebody else. And it's too late. As much as I've impacted change in this place, I know for a fact that I will give my entire self, pour my entire self into that work outside this place. Because I don't want the work to be too late. That's what it means to center the harm. My job, my goal, my lifeblood is to prevent the harm that I caused to ever happen in any time else. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any final questions? All right, Dr. Bakr, do you have any motion you want to make at this time?
I do have a rationale as well to support the recommendation. Mr. Bakr has served 23 years for an offense in which he, at the age of 18, murdered a 16-year-old and injured another party. His disciplinary record also documents serious transgressions from early in his incarceration. Still, over the last 10 years, he has established a remarkable record clear of any disciplinary tickets and replete with educational, occupational, and personal accomplishments and volunteer endeavors. The level of respect that he has attained within the institution and positive contributions he has made strongly suggest that his release would not be detrimental to institutional discipline. In fact, as is quite rare, a former warden has indicated to this board that his professional assessment is that Mr. Bakr's release would be an asset to discipline within the institution. We also are tasked with considering whether Mr. Bakr could be expected to conform to the conditions of release. Again, it's noteworthy that he has attained increasing levels of trust in the past decade, and for the same duration has not received a single ticket. He has a strong parole plan with a home that his wife has already acquired, concrete offers of employment, and a robust support system. From my research of his case and extensive interview with Mr. Bakr, I do share the assessment of those who have interacted with him more closely that he is not only fully equipped to conform to the conditions of parole, but also posed to make substantial contributions for the benefit of the broader community. This leaves only the heavy question of whether Mr. Bakr's release would deprecate the severity of the underlying offense. Nobody holds the power to reverse the harm of Mr. Bakr's past actions. The pain that has been inflicted upon the family of Mr. Ortiz and Mr. Rivera is irreversible. So too is the stress that they have undoubtedly incurred in continued case proceedings, including this hearing. I recognize the anguish that results from the initial finding of some justice in a 60-year sentence, only to have it continually eroded by system proceedings. If I had any doubt in the sincerity of Mr. Bakr's remorse and his full acceptance of responsibility, I would find release too great of a dishonor to the family that has been most deeply impacted by this crime. I also want to acknowledge how hollow any list of institutional accomplishments, no matter how great, can sound alongside the raw pain of a family's loss. I understand, too, the difficulty of hearing Mr. Bakr's support system celebrated when Mr. Ortiz, at the tender age of 16, was stripped of the opportunity to continue his life in his family's loving embrace. That said, it is my impression that Mr. Bakr understands his release would not alleviate his debt to society. To paraphrase his words, he is committed to living his life in service, to honor the harm that he caused by preventing this madness from happening to others. It is only because of my belief that he is genuinely poised to prevent other families from having to suffer the depth of the loss experienced by Mr. Ortiz's family, and my impression that release would not be alleviating Mr. Bakr of his sentence, but rather would be releasing him to the next phase of his reparations, that I do find his release would not deprecate such a devastating offense. And it's on that basis that I do move to grant parole to Mr. Bakr.
Motion's been made. Do we have a second? Mr. Delgado seconds the motion. Amy, would you please call the roll?
Bakr,
Yes.
Mr. Boland,
No.
Mr. Coates,
Yes.
Mr. Delgado,
Aye.
Mr. Grubbs,
No.
Mr. Heaton.
No.
Ms. Taronis,
Yes.
Ms. Tyson,
Yes.
Mr. Doopy.
Yes.
With a 6-3 vote, his parole is granted. Mr. Baker, you are done. We will send everything to the facility, okay?
Thank you.
Do we have a motion to close the meeting? All right. Motion made and seconded by Ms. Taronis. Those in favor respond by voting yes.
Aye.
Aye. Meeting adjourned.
is the first time that we that we do one from Illinois. Actually, almost. I think I started a little bit. It started at 9 a.m. and I think I jumped on a few minutes after, but definitely a lot different than the other hearings that we normally tune into. And I asked who are the people in the background. I think it was it might have been family, people from the public, attorneys and whatnot. So a lot different. Anyhow, I'm gonna go ahead and cut the stream. Really appreciate you guys, and like I said around here, life's like a candle. Once you blow it out, it's lights out. And with that, we are Roxy. Yeah, I definitely gotta agree with you on that one. A lot different than the other ones that we normally listen to. Right now, what time is it right now? It's 9:01. I'm gonna check. I think they might be having some Utah ones still going on. If they do have some Utah ones going on, I'll go ahead and set that up and get the ball rolling